Well, what happened is when we landed in Taranto, and then the Americans and British, the Queen's Brigade, landed at Salerno, and we sort of formed up there, and there wasn't really very much going on. The Germans were building a line of defences, what they call the Gustav. Is it the Gustav line? I get mixed up now. Anyway, they brought down from Germany all these slave labourers building pillboxes and built a fantastic sort of Maginot Line right from the sea across through Cassino to the Adriatic, which is where they were going to hold us. Well, we were fighting there for month after month after month. It was they say that's why that was like the First World War. We were fighting then, and we'd come out and have a rest, then go back in again and have a rest, then come back. It was just no movement at all. And then eventually the New Zealanders failed to capture Cassino, and we were up north of Cassino in the Bowl, what they called the Bowl, where there was no vehicle. You're about 5 miles from even a track. Everything came up by Indian port. We had Indian porters carrying stuff on their head, and mules, of course, endless mules. And that was in the Bowl. And then we handed over to the Poles, because the Poles were now very much on our side. And the final capture of the monastery was done by the Poles. And we were a bit south of Cassino when the town and the monastery fell and the line was broken. And we had a second in command called Vino Fisher. Well, Major Fisher, we call him Vino Fisher. And the CO hunter was taking us out on a patrol in rather long grass to see the lie of the land, like an ordinary reconnaissance, all the company commander. And Vino Fisher suddenly shouted, "Stop!" And we all held ourselves to the ground. He said, "Look, there's a Camberwell beauty, or a lesser spotted." He'd seen some butterflies. He felt a bit struck. When someone shouts "stop," you hold yourself to the ground. He spotted, he was a butterfly collector or something. He found some rub. All got to our feet again. But I think I told you yesterday also, when you do get down, you come under fire, you do get down, you tend automatically to try to dig yourself in. It's most peculiar. You just don't lie still like that. You're trying to... It's funny how it automatically sets in. You're trying to be a mole or something, digging. It's because everyone I've spoken to always remembers that side of it. And of course, they always nowadays make the mistake of thinking if you hear you're being shot at, you get down. Because the bullets you hear are already a mile behind you. You're shot by the ones you don't hear. You're killed by the bullets you don't hear. The ones you hear are way past you, sound travelling so slow. So you don't know you're being fired at till you suddenly get casualties. Then a second or so later you hear the crack of the shots. So it's no good waiting for the bang and then getting down, because that bullet's already sailed away behind you. It's quite a long pause, the time that sound travels. It's quite slow.
And you were talking about the difference between your rations and the Americans. Could you explain that again?
Well, the Americans had a rapid turnover. They always had endless troops, so they could turn their... If we went in the front line, we were there a week or two. The Americans were only there for a day or two. They could keep it. Therefore, they needn't give them proper food. They had a thing called K-ration, which was about that size, a bit smaller than that. Biscuits and chocolate and sweets and chewing gum, and enough to live on for a day. It was cold, and there was presumably lemonade powder or something like that. They could use their water bottle. But it only lasted a day or two, and they were relieved, and then they could go back and have proper food. But if they were going to stay in the line the length we did, we wanted proper food. And we had marvellous food brought right up to the front. We had our cookers with us in the front line. Yeah, the number one burners, you know them yourself.
Yes.
With the containers, you show a row of containers, put the tins in, have the number one burner roaring away. And the rations are marvellous. Compo rations. They're a box of rations, one man for 14 days, or 14 men for 1 day.
Yeah.
You know all this. Of course you do. And they were lovely quality. M&V.
And they were rather envious.
Oh,
weren't they?
absolutely. I've never seen anything like that. And the steak and kidney pie in a tin and all that.
Which makes a change for them usually having everything.
Yeah. And of course they had no booze. And we had a bottle of whiskey or gin whenever we could, but also at a place called Benevento, the army took over a distillery, and they turned out Benevento gin, eventually from odds and ends scrap. You would buy this Italian gin, it wasn't very good, but it was all right. Our doctor had a hypodermic needle, and he would inject gin into our oranges. Which is a useful thing for a doctor to be able to do. But we got oranges quite often, so you could peel a gin and orange occasionally.
The Americans were never allowed.
No booze in the Army, Navy, Air Force, never at all, anywhere near it, no. You could never have any drink near them. No. There was local wine you could occasionally get, but the Germans had taken most of the wine. Of course, the Italians kept running out saying the Germans were taking everything, and they had, more or less. The Germans are called tedeschi. Tedeschi portare tutti, niente mangiare, niente sigaretti, niente biscotti, niente sole. I know all this. They come out running. You give them biscuits and cigarettes and sweets for the children. But they were very good, the old Irish. I think if you've got to fight a war anywhere, select somewhere like Italy. Lovely climate, nice countryside. Another strange thing about the Americans is that when our soldiers were killed, we buried them as soon as we could on the spot. Put up a little cross or sign and made a mark on it and handed it back to battalion headquarters. So later on they could all be gathered up. But you weren't allowed to do that with Americans. You had to leave dead Americans where they were. And eventually they would send up people to get them, but you weren't meant to put them in graves. You had to leave them on top of the ground. So when you're at Cassino, you could say, you'll find a dead American there. I go left, you see 2 dead Americans. You can use them as signposts all over the place. Funny that. But they came up fairly soon. The American Graves Commission were nearly all Filipinos and people like that. They're marvellous, come up in their jeeps and take the Americans away in the middle of a battle if they could. But we buried ours, you see, and gave a grid reference and a cross if possible. But I feel very guilty after that Fort McGregor thing when we were burying those German paratroopers that I didn't bother to take their identity discs. And I think back now, a lot of them, the Padre and other people were doing that, but I was shoveling them in a bit quick. And I think there must be German children now wondering what happened to Dad. Just because I didn't bother to take his identity disc off when I buried him, he's just missing,